The sun over Dry Creek didn't rise so much as it bled into the horizon, spilling a harsh, rust-red light across the street. The dust in the air caught it, hanging in lazy motes that clung to skin, to hair, to memory. Out here, mornings didn't promise anything good. They just arrived, like a gambler with an empty smile and a loaded deck. You could hear the auctioneer before you saw him. High, nasal voice cutting through the air, each word stretched and snapped like a bullwhip. Step right up, folks, step right. Up? Ain't every day you get merchandise like this. Merchandise. That was his word. And the thing about words? They told you everything about a man's soul. The crowd had gathered tight, boots grinding grit into the packed earth. Hats tipped forward to keep the sun out of eyes, shadows turning faces into shapes you couldn't quite read. There was the stink of horse sweat, tobacco, unwashed bodies, and if you stood close enough, a copper tang under it all. That copper was blood. The girl stood on the platform barefoot, her toes curling against the splintered wood, as if gripping it could keep her upright. She swayed once, just barely, before catching herself. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her dress, a pale thing, maybe blue once, was torn across the hem, darkened at the thighs. Blood seeped through in slow, stubborn blotches. Her hands were empty. No bundle, no shawl, no one at her side. From somewhere in the crowd, a man chuckled low. Still wet from the birthing, he said. Not loud enough for the auctioneer, but plenty for his friends. Another voice slurred from whiskey even at this hour called. Bet she can't even walk a mile without keeling over. Won't last a week. The laughter rippled, cruel and easy. That's the thing about towns like Dry Creek. Cruelty was just another pastime. Same as cards or whiskey dot from the back of the crowd, leaning against a post outside the livery. Elias. Harp watched without moving. His hat's brim shadowed his face, but his eyes were fixed steady as a hawk's on the girl. Elias had the kind of face the West carved out of its own bones, weathered lines from years under sun and wind, jaw set like it had forgotten how to unclench. His shirt was clean but faded, sleeves rolled past his elbows. His boots were scuffed, spurs dulled from use. He hadn't planned on stopping in town today. Supplies, maybe. Nails for the south fence. Feed for the mare. Not this. Not her. But when? The auctioneer yanked her forward by the arm, and she flinched like a skittish colt. Something in Elias's chest moved, something he thought had long since gone to dust. The auctioneer was sweating through his vest, wiping his brow between calls. Now, I'll start the bid at $5, he barked, grinning wide. Strong hips, good bones. Just a bit tenderizing left, gentlemen. A hand shot up. 6, another. 7. She shifted her weight, lips pressed so tight they were white. Elias could see her trembling from here, even though she held her chin high. $8. Someone shouted from near the saloon doors. The price climbed, but it wasn't charity. Elias could hear it in their voices. They weren't buying a person, they were buying the idea of ownership, the cruel novelty of a wounded thing. 10. Yelled a man with a jagged scar across his cheek. His teeth flashed in the sun. Elias exhaled slow, like he was steadying for a shot. He remembered another platform years ago. A smaller woman, darker hair, eyes bright even through the pain. His wife, Mary, on her last day, not an auction. A bed, a midwife shaking her head. Blood soaking into sheets faster than he could blot it. The tiny, still bundle the midwife had taken away without words. He'd buried them both on the same morning. 11. Scarface called again, grinning. The girl's eyes flickered over the crowd. Not pleading, Elias recognized the look. It was measuring, counting exits, looking for a hole in the wall big enough to slip through. Elias pushed away from the post. 15. he said. Heads turned. The auctioneer froze mid-gesture. $15? He repeated, eyebrows climbing. Well, now, that's a jump. Scarface sneered. 16. Elias didn't look at him. 20. Gasps this time. $20 could buy 2 good horses or 3 months' supplies. The auctioneer hesitated. Do I hear 21? The crowd was silent. Even Scarface kept his mouth shut. Sold. The auctioneer barked, slamming his gavel. Sold, too. Mr. Elias Hart, he said, walking forward. Up close, she looked smaller. Skin pale under the dirt, lips cracked, hair tangled and stuck to her cheeks. She didn't step back when he stopped in front of her. Just watched him like... She was waiting for the catch. Elias took off his hat, held it loosely in one hand. You'll ride with me, he said, voice low. For a second, she said nothing. Then, barely a whisper. Why? He didn't answer. Not here. They walked toward his horse, the crowd parting slow, muttering like a river under ice. The auctioneer called after him. Mr. Hart, you'll regret that purchase. Ain't nothing but trouble. Elias didn't look back. She moved stiffly beside him, each step careful. When she winced, he slowed without comment. By the time they reached the mare, the heat was starting to bite. Elias helped her into the saddle gently, like she was made of glass, and swung up behind. From somewhere behind them came a voice, low and mean. We'll see who gets her in the end. Elias felt her tense. His hand on the reins tightened. As they rode out of town, the dust swallowed them up. Behind, the auctioneer's platform shrank into the heat shimmer. From the edge of the street, a man stood in the shade of a post, hat pulled low, cigarette smoke curling around his jaw. He watched them go with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The narrator's voice slipped into the space between hoofbeats. No one knew then, but that ride out of town would set off more trouble than either of them could reckon with. And the West? Well, it was just waiting to see who'd come out the other side. The mare's hooves drummed a steady beat on the hardpan, each strike kicking up a puff of pale dust that clung to their boots and coats. The road out of Dry Creek was a ribbon of baked earth, splitting the sunburned land into 2 endless halves. Girl sat stiff in the saddle, back rigid, chin tilted slightly down like she was trying to disappear into herself. Elias kept his hands loose on the reins, letting the mare find her own pace. You'll slide clean off if you keep that spine locked, he said finally. She didn't answer. Elias had seen that kind of silence before. It was a wall. Some folks built it to keep people out. Others built it so they wouldn't have to hear themselves fall apart. They rode for an hour without speaking. The sun climbed, heat pressing down heavy. A buzzard wheeled high overhead, dark wings cutting lazy circles. Against the bright sky, when the mare slowed at a shallow creek, Elias swung down and reached a hand to her. She hesitated before letting him help her dismount. He handed her a canteen. Drink. Her fingers tightened around the tin, but she didn't lift it. Don't need your charity, she muttered. He snorted. Ain't charity. You fall over. I'm the one has to haul you the rest of the way, so drink. She shot him a look half defiance. Have something softer, but took a long swallow. Elias knelt by the water, splashing it over his face. The cold bit his skin, but it kept his mind. Clear Mary would have scolded him for buying the girl. Said it wasn't his fight, but he'd spent too many years watching bad men win. Sometimes you had to stick your boot in the dirt and say, not this time. He glanced back. She was standing with her arms wrapped tight around herself, staring downstream, like the current might carry her somewhere else. They were 2 miles from the canyon mouth when the sound came a sharp crack of brush. Elias reined the mare to a halt. Don't move, he said quietly. Before she could ask, two riders emerged from behind a cluster of mesquite, blocking the trail. Both were thick-shouldered, faces browned and creased from sun, eyes mean. "Well, now," the taller one drawled, "didn't figure we'd catch up so quick." Elias didn't bother asking what they wanted. He already knew. "Turn around," Elias said out. The shorter man laughed, the sound wet and unpleasant. "Ain't polite to tell a man no before he's made his offer." His eyes slid to the girl. "You remember us, darlin'?" She froze, color draining from her cheeks. Elias didn't wait for the rest. He shifted in the saddle, thumbed the hammer back on his Colt, and fired. The taller man jerked sideways, hat spinning into the dust. His horse reared, screaming. The shorter one yanked at his pistol, but Elias was faster 2 shots, quick as a snake's tongue. One hit the ground by the man's boot, spraying grit. The other sang past his ear close enough to make him flinch. "You ain't talking her," Elias said, voice flat. The taller man spat blood into the dirt, glaring. "This ain't over, Hart." Elias kept the Colt steady. "It is for today." They backed off slow, muttering, until the mesquite swallowed them again. Only then did Elias holster the gun. She was breathing hard, knuckles white where she gripped the saddle horn. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her eyes were still wide. "They were at the auction," she said, voice barely more than a whisper. "I figured," Elias replied. "They come sniffing again. They'll regret it." She looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken hanging between them. Then she faced forward again. They made camp in a dry arroyo, the walls cutting the wind. Elias built a small fire, coaxing it from kindling until it licked at the sky in thin orange fingers. She sat cross-legged on the far side, silent. The firelight made her eyes look darker, shadow pooling under her cheekbones. Elias poured water into a tin cup and slid it across to her. "Drink." She took it this time without a fight. After a moment, she said, "My name's Clara." He nodded once. "Elias." Later, when the fire had burned down to embers, she spoke again, halting at first, like each word was a stone. She had to haul up from deep water. She'd been in a mining camp south of the Rio Bravo, married or as close as you could get out there, to a man named Jonah Price. He'd worked the dig, spent his nights drinking, and left her with bruises more. Often than not, when the baby came early, he decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Sold her off to cover his gambling debts. She stopped there, lips trembling. Elias didn't push. He just said, "You can choose where you go once you're strong again." The wind shifted, carrying a wolf's howl from far off in the hills. Clara's head lifted, eyes searching the dark dot. Elias added a log to the fire. "Don't fret. Out here, Wills'll leave you be if you don't give him reason." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Guess that's true for people, too." They didn't talk much after that. The fire cracked, the mare shifted on her tether, and the desert night settled over them like a heavy blanket. But Elias lay awake long after she'd curled into her bedroll, one hand resting near the Colt on his belt, because he knew men like the ones from the trail, and he knew they didn't let go easy. The narrator's voice slipped in, low and certain. The West had teeth, and they weren't all four-legged. Some wore spurs and skin and smiles you didn't see coming until it was too late. The Hart Ranch came into view late the next day, just as the light began to lean toward gold. It wasn't much two weathered buildings, a windmill creaking in the breeze, and a split-rail fence that sagged in places, but the land spread wide and free around it. Grass shimmered in the fading sun, and the smell of sage drifted on the wind. Clara sat the saddle straighter as they approached, eyes darting over everything like she didn't trust it was real. Elias could almost see her measuring the space between the fence posts. The distance to the tree line, the way a trapped animal might map its escape. When they dismounted, she stood still, boots sinking slightly into the dust. "This is it," Elias said, unstrapping the bedroll from the mare. "Ain't the biggest spread, but it's home." She didn't answer, just followed him inside the small ranch house. The place smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee gone stale. There was a single room with a table, 2 chairs, and a small iron stove. A curtained-off corner held a bed, its quilt worn thin from years of washing. "You can take the bed," Elias said. "I'll sleep in the barn." Her brow furrowed. "You don't have to." "I ain't arguing it, Clara." Something in his tone shut her up quick. Over the next days, she learned the rhythm of the place. Morning came with the groan of the windmill, the sound of Elias moving about outside feeding the mare, checking the fence, mending whatever needed. Mending. She swept the floor, washed clothes in a basin out back, and took in the quiet. Too much quiet, sometimes. It left room for her thoughts to crowd in. The baby stayed wrapped tight in a faded blanket. Elias never asked to see him. Maybe? He figured if she wanted to show him, she would, but he noticed the way she kept the bundle close, even when her hands were busy. At night, he could hear her soft humming through the curtain, the kind of lullaby that was more for her own comfort than the child's. One afternoon, a neighbor rode up a stocky man named Barrett with a sun-reddened face and a permanent squint. "Well?" "Hart," Barrett called as he swung off his horse. "Didn't know you were in the market for a wife." Elias didn't even look up from fixing the gate latch. "Ain't." Barrett grinned, glancing at Clara where she stood by the water trough. "Could have fooled me." Clara's jaw tightened. "I'd rather marry a cactus," she said flatly. Barrett barked a laugh. Elias almost smiled. Almost, but the easy moments didn't last. 3 days after Barrett's visit, Elias spotted fresh hoofprints along the south fence 2 riders, judging by the spacing and depth. He followed them for a half-mile before they veered off toward the hills. He didn't tell Clara. No sense in spooking her until he was sure. Still, he caught her glancing toward the horizon more often, like she felt something coming. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind rattled the shutters, and the sky cracked open with jagged white lightning. Rain hammered the roof so hard it drowned out the stove's steady pop. Clara sat at the table, turning a tin cup in her hands. Her hair hung loose, damp from the earlier dash to cover the woodpile. Elias poured coffee, set a steaming mug in front of her. She stared into it. "Jonah used to drink nights like this," she said quietly. "Said storms made him feel trapped. I guess that's why he sold me storms and babies." Elias leaned back in his chair. "That ain't a man. That's a coward in a man's skin." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the lamplight. "You ever lose someone?" He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "My wife. Child too. Both in one night." The storm seemed to hold its breath outside. Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Ain't nothing for you to be sorry for." They sat in silence until the wind shifted. Elias caught at first a new sound under the rain. Hooves, slow, deliberate. He moved to the window, pulled the curtain. Just enough to see. A rider was out there, framed in the lightning flash. Tall in the saddle, hat pulled low. "Stay here," Elias said, already reaching for his Colt. He stepped onto the porch, rain soaking his shirt in seconds. The rider stayed just beyond the fence line, motionless except for the steam rising from his horse's flanks. Even in the dark, Elias knew that shape. The man from Dry Creek, the one who'd watched them ride out. The rider tipped his hat back, grinning like they were old friends. "Evenin', Hart." Elias said nothing. "Fine place you got here. Shame if trouble found its way to it." His eyes flicked toward the house. Elias's voice was steady. You've had your say. Now ride on. The grin didn't fade. Oh, I'll ride on, for now. The man turned his horse and disappeared into the rain. When Elias came back inside, Clara was standing, the baby clutched close. Who was it? She asked. Just someone passing through, he lied. But she didn't believe him. She'd seen the look in his eyes when he came through the door. That night, neither of them slept much. Elias lay in the barn, listening to the storm fade, and the coyotes' call in the distance dot in the house. Clara sat awake by the cold stove, the baby quiet in her arms, eyes fixed on the window. Somewhere out in the dark, a man was waiting. The narrator's voice slid low into the space between heartbeats. Out? Here, peace don't last. And if you've got something worth keeping, you best be ready to fight for it. Morning came pale and sharp after the storm, the kind of light that made every drop of water on the grass shine like a coin. Elias stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, the sound of hooves rolled in from the south. Not fast, steady, confident. The outlaw from the fence line rode into the yard, dust already drying on his coat from the night's rain. 2 more men followed, both the kind who carried their guns low and loose. Clara stepped into the doorway, the baby tucked against her shoulder. Elias didn't turn, but his voice cut like wire. Get inside. Lock the door. She hesitated, then obeyed. The outlaw swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with a thud. Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit, he said, smile thin. You're not my neighbor, Elias replied. The man's eyes glinted. I could be. That girl you bought? She's mine by right. Husband's debt is my debt now, and I aim to collect. Elias shifted his weight, his hand hanging near the colt at his hip. She's not for sale. Not today, not ever. One of the men spat into the dirt. We can do this easy, Art, or we can do it loud. Elias didn't answer with words. He drew. The first shot cracked the air, scattering the chickens. The man who'd been talking folded into the dirt before his gun cleared the holster. The other fired wild, grazing the porch post, splinters flying. Elias's second shot took his hat clean off and sent him scrambling for cover. The outlaw didn't flinch, just smiled wider. You've still got fight in you. Good. Makes it interesting. A window banged open. Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Elias! He glanced up just in time to see her toss him the Winchester from inside. He caught it, rolled behind. The water trough as the outlaw's bullet punched a hole in the porch rail. The yard filled with the smell of gunpowder and dust. Chickens screamed and scattered. The outlaw circled wide, trying to draw Elias out in the house. Clara's heart hammered. She could hear every shot, every boot step in the dirt. Her eyes fell on Elias's spare revolver hanging from the wall peg. Her hands trembled as she took it down. She had never fired a gun. Jonah had kept them locked away, claiming they were men's tools. But she'd watched him enough to know the weight, the way the hammer cocked, the way the barrel had to. Point steady, not jerking outside, Elias ducked behind the trough as a bullet whined past his ear. His shoulder burned, grazed. Not deep, then came a sound he didn't expect. A sharp crack from the porch. The outlaw's horse screamed and bolted, dust kicking high. The man himself jerked back, a splinter from the porch post, stinging his cheek. Clara stood in the doorway, revolver in both hands, eyes locked on the outlaw. Get off this land, she shouted, voice steady in a way that made Elias's chest tighten. The outlaw stared at her for a beat too long, then spat into the dust. This ain't done, he said, and swung on to a borrowed horse. His men followed, one limping, the other holding his side. They rode out the way they came, their shapes shrinking into the heat shimmer. Elias lowered the Winchester and walked up the porch steps. Clara was still holding the revolver. Knuckles. "White, mind handing that back?" he said gently. She blinked like she was waking from a dream, and set it in his palm. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes were wet. "I didn't think I could do it," he smiled faintly. "You did." They worked in silence to patch the porch and gather the scattered chickens. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder, but under it was something else, relief. Later inside, Clara cleaned the scrape on his shoulder, hands surprisingly steady. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But every time I do, I remember there's nothing out there I want more than what I've got here." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at the baby sleeping in her arms. "I want to stay," she said finally. "Not because I owe you, because it feels like home." For the first time in years, Elias felt something ease inside him. Like a knot he'd been carrying had loosened. "Well," he said, trying to keep his voice light, "if you're staying, you'll have to pull your weight. Chores don't do themselves." She smirked. "Fine, but I'm not eating those biscuits." "You make. They could kill a man," he chuckled. "Fair." That evening, the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in fire and gold. They saddled the Marais, not because they were leaving for good, but because there were supplies to get, and the world didn't wait. Clara rode in front, the baby between them, Elias's arms steady around both. The wind was cool, the dust low, and the road stretched wide ahead. The narrator's voice came in soft over the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves. "Out here, a man can buy a life for the price of a horse. But it ain't the buying that matters. It's what you give after that keeps it worth living. If this story found its way into you, don't just keep it. Pass it on. And maybe ask yourself, what would you have done?"